given, that's how we live it. Don't be mad at the system, it's simply how we've existed. I hear a lot of people talking like they politicians and choose to be an accountant because it's safe in the business. Not because they want to do it, just because they heard it pays. And who the fuck wants to be poor knowing that's how we've been raised? Society is getting heavy, I can feel the weight. The pressure of success is like 100 million pounds of shit.
How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, I'm in Maryland, enjoying my vacation. Figure in the meantime, get a little bit of a video out there. I wanted to do this video last week. We didn't get a chance to, so I figured we could do it this week. And this video is about being gassed. What do I mean by being gassed? Basically, when an inmate makes a cocktail, poop, piss, vomit, semen, whatever it is, and they throw it at staff. It's one of the worst things that can happen to you as a correctional professional. And me and Russ are going to discuss some of our experiences, some tips about what you should do if you do get gassed, and just overall what the agency needs to do. I mean, are we pushing this forward? Are we recommending this to the prosecutor? I mean, hopefully some agencies realize that this is a serious threat to our lifestyle, to who we are. Because don't forget, when you get splashed, if that inmate has diseases or stuff, we have to be careful when we go home. And we'll express that during our show. And guys, mind you, our show is brought to you by 3 sponsors. One is American Military University. If you guys are looking to get that degree, seek that higher education, don't forget, man, go to American Military University. It's a great, great online school, and they support what we do in corrections. We also have, this video is also brought to you by Guardian RFID. From inmate tracking and cell checks to cloud-based business and artificial intelligence, Guardian RFID digitally transforms jails, prisons, and juvenile detention facilities of every size. Visit guardianrfid.com for more information. And we also have my new sponsor, which is the WRAP, W-R-A-P. Now, controlling combative subjects quickly and in an upright position so they can breathe has never been more important. Departments such as Washington, DOC, LA County, San Diego County, and hundreds of other facilities across the U.S. trust and believe in the WRAP restraint. Go to saferestraints.com for contact information and mention Tier Talk to receive instructor training at no cost. Lower liability for your facility and your personnel with the WRAP. Give the WRAP a call today, 1-800-WRAP-911. Guys, if you're not familiar with the WRAP, inside the description of this video is a link to a video that shows you exactly what the WRAP is. And I believe it's definitely a good tool for us to use in corrections. So, guys, my guest today is going to be none other than Russ Hamilton. What's up, Russ?
Hey, Anthony. Glad to be here.
Hey, Russ, just, mind introducing yourself and tell us how's Keepers of Chaos going?
Sure, absolutely. My name's Russ Hamilton. I'm a veteran of California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. I've also worked in the juvenile justice system, and I've also had my hand in doing a little bit of reentry and rehabilitation. I run Keepers of Chaos, which is for anyone that's involved in the correctional system in any way. You can come on in there, and we give great training, history, knowledge, content, and it's just a great way for corrections professionals. And that's what I really stress on there, is that word professionals inside of that group. It's just a great way to connect and to be able to learn more about the great profession that you are in.
You also have a great mentoring program on Keepers of Chaos, correct? How's that going?
We do all kinds of things, from formal mentoring to also, just come in there. If you've got a question, ask. But it's the same on this forum here too. Anything you say, even if you want it to be, outside the bounds of the program or anything, I always try and I can miss emails and stuff here and there sometimes that happens with as busy as this is. But if someone needs some advice, if someone needs some input, if someone wants a little bit of mentoring directly from me or any of the great guys that I've got in there, I've got Jack Mosley, I've got Jim Hall, I've got Nate Jarman, and just bunches of others. We take the time to help people in this profession because it's hard enough as it is without it, becoming this huge thing where, people often get bad advice or they're just thrown to the wolves and expected to sink or swim.
Hey, Russ, so we're talking about being gassed by an inmate. I mean, there's a lot of different terminology for this. Some would call it splash, but basically we're talking about that prison cocktail. I mean, I believe California uses the word gas. I mean, are you familiar with any other terminology for when an inmate decides to throw a cocktail at an officer or some professional staff member?
Yeah, gas or gassing is the terminology we use. And the reason that we use that specific terminology is that's the way it's encoded into the penal code in California. In California, it is a felony to gas any correctional officer. So we have that little bit of protection. That protection, of course, is only as good as, the fact of people like district attorneys and so forth being willing to prosecute that. But it does give us a tool. It also gives us a tool to approach the court if we need to do something with regards to testing that inmate for potential communicable diseases. And so that's the terminology that I prefer because I'm familiar with it and because I know that it's an actual term inside California Penal Code.
Actually, if you check out my thumbnail, that's of a captain at Rikers who got splashed recently by human feces. It's all over the white of his shirt. I mean, I have never been gassed. I have grabbed human poop that was put on a lock that I had to open, which wasn't the best experience. I kind of smelled something on my hand, realized what it was, and it was a very uncomfortable feeling because obviously the biggest concern is if this inmate has diseases, I have to go back home. So I do recommend, obviously, any interaction, even if it's, you're having to handle an inmate who's bleeding, any interaction with, bodily fluid, you need to get yourself checked immediately. And then you need to let your family know this is what happened. And I'm going to be a little standoffish when it comes to intimacy for our protection. But Russ, I mean, people don't realize how bad it is to have that cocktail thrown at you. I mean, look how much it can actually change your daily routine at home. I mean, that intimacy that you're going to have with your loved one. I mean, all that stuff has to get adjusted when you have that inmate that decides to be, lack of a better word, an idiot. And as you're walking by, just splash you with all types of bodily fluid, correct?
Yeah, it's a horrible experience. It's something that makes you gag and gasp. And I've had any number of those, probably, 4 or 5 times. I've had blood from an inmate that tested positive for hepatitis before. I've had, the dookie and the piss. Never had it so bad that it was covering me or anything, but had it, sometimes where it was enough to make me gag, make me vomit, and kind of put a damper on my whole day, as it were. And I've had that several times, 4 or 5 times, I would guess.
Right off the bat, hopefully when you do get splashed, the agency does the right thing. They should be sent out. But another thing that should be doing is they should be securing your clothes for evidence. A lot of people don't realize that you need that evidence because you're going to look to push that to the next level. So the moment you get splashed, besides, and we'll get to dealing with the inmate, I just want to make sure that we're good on our end, is that besides making sure you seek medical attention immediately, the clothes you're wearing should be secured for evidence and should be given over to the investigative authority so we can begin pushing that over to the higher level for prosecution. But you know what's sad, Russ? And I realize this. When you work for a prisoner or jail that is in a very active area, and what I mean by that is just a high crime rate, some of the stuff that happens to us behind the wall gets minimized because they're so overwhelmed with work that it's like, okay, well, this is the dangers of correction, so we're not going to go ahead and push it. But then you get these, these other areas where, the community's not that bad, not that high in crime, and they're willing to go balls to the wall, excuse my language, but balls to the wall with anything that happens, including what happens behind the wall. They're willing to invest that time. I find that to be unfair for those officers who work in areas that do have high crime, that if you work in corrections, things tend to get pushed aside because the county itself or the prosecutor itself may be overwhelmed with cases. Don't you feel that that inconsistency messes with our safety and eliminates proper deterrence?
Yeah, and you're right that it shouldn't be that way. That's why we should have good lines of communications with those district attorneys. And we should also, more than that, because we're not always reliant on them, we should be, on the spot and ready to be able to proceed with these cases, with evidence, with the report writing and everything else that comes along with it. I think it's really sad to see, some departments, some facilities that just, fall down on that, and they don't think about pushing it forward. And it's just one of those things that, they consider it as just part of doing business. It's not that. This is where we need that extra bit of protection. And to me, it doesn't really matter if it's a gassing incident or if it's just, a straight on assault and battery, or whatever. What matters to me is that it should always be pushed forward. It should always be pushed forward in a timely manner. And we should always be very insistent upon the district attorney, saying yay or nay to the prosecution and letting those rack up and holding his feet to the fire. And if he's not holding his feet to the fire, then it should be, turned over to the state attorney general or whoever else might be in a position to actually take that case forward. Because I think it's ridiculous that we should be considered, cannon fodder in any way, shape, or form whatsoever.
Yeah, and guys, by the way, inmates that tend to gas staff, I want you guys to realize something. They're looking for a reaction. You have to be wary of our response when it comes to getting gassed. I mean, automatically, when you get gassed, I could just imagine being overwhelmed with anger, frustration, and you want to get at that person that did that. But I want you to realize something. That inmate wants that to happen. That's why they did that. I know a lot of inmates that they gas somebody, but then what happens here is that there's staff, because they're overwhelmed with emotion, they wind up going after that inmate immediately, even though the inmate no longer poses a threat. And then the inmate winds up getting what they consider on the outside retaliation. And how they directly get that is because they see that the inmate splashed you, and then everybody's looking at you to see how you responded to that. And it's one of the most frustrating things that you have to do as a correctional professional is to literally, and it's sad to say this, but to make sure you don't get overwhelmed by emotion and immediately respond. Because at that point, I'll guarantee you, if it ever gets traveled up and that inmate does get assaulted after that, they're going to look to see, did you have to pull that inmate out of their cell? Was that inmate a threat? And the funny thing is, guys, there's always the lawyers out there that are watching all these inmates who are problematic. They are. They're watching the inmates that are assaultive. They're watching the inmates that, again, throw bodily fluid. And they're always there to try to represent that inmate the moment the situation occurs, because they're expecting us to retaliate on that inmate. And what happens here is those lawyers know that when an inmate, decides to assault staff or decides to throw bodily fluid at one of our staff members, they're expecting some form of retaliation, and then that becomes bank for them. Nobody cares, sad thing, about what the inmate did prior if our reaction to it is poor and aggressive. When it does matter is if we maintain our cool, and as that happens, we do whatever we can to obviously maintain that cool to keep things objective. So when those lawyers do call, there's no case. We did not retaliate. We remained professional, as hard as that is, but we did. We remained professional, and it puts those lawyers strictly on the defense and not the offense. But Russ, I know this is a very fine line here, Russ, but I definitely want to make sure that people know that the reaction, that's what the inmate wants. They want us to lose our cool. They want us to react in that retaliatory fashion. But I don't think that some people realize what that can lead as that starts to move up further and further up the chain in the legal system, right? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, the thing that we really have to focus on is we have to focus on, first of all, preserving the chain of evidence with regard to the clothing and perhaps any video that exists of it. The second thing we have to do is we have to make it safe for other staff. We don't necessarily know, what other dookie bombs or other things that he's got in there that he might be ready to throw. So at some point we need to get to that. We need to get the officer that's been, immediately harmed out of the situation. We need to have him assessed and medically cleared and given a chance to cool down, probably go home or whatever for the night. But then we have to get back to dealing with that particular inmate. Your chance of having to use any force in a situation like that's usually very small, because usually the inmate's locked away. If an inmate's not locked away, you might have to, in order to defend yourself, defend your life, you might have to do something in that instant if they're attacking you in the open or in a day room or something like that. Generally, though, these types of issues tend to happen in segregation or SHU units or some kind of management units, but that's not always the case.
Yeah, and I'm going to tell you something, Russ. You hit on something so key. One of the reasons why you want to remove the staff member that got splashed from that scene or gassed from that scene, one of the things Russ said, besides having them checked medically, making sure the clothing gets confiscated and packed up as evidence, that's really key. I like what Russ even mentioned about sending the person home, giving them a chance to cool down, because as I said, it is extremely frustrating. I could just imagine. But I think it's the same thing as when you have an officer get assaulted. You want to try to have that appearance of objectivity. So what I mean by that is you want to remove someone that's directly connected to the incident, so the lawyers on the other side don't have a platform, if you will, because trust and believe, they're looking at those things. They're looking to see, well, that officer that was involved in restraining that individual, wasn't that the officer that was splashed? Because I noticed that the inmate had some bruises. Was the officer that got splashed on that team? They're asking for all that. So I like what Russ said. This is where we police each other. Hey, I know you just got splashed, Russ. You know what? Go take a second. Go breathe. We'll handle it from here. We'll cover from here. Because at that point, what are we trying to do is that we know if we do have to handle this inmate still poses a threat. We want to make sure that no one can point the finger at Russ. And I'll guarantee you, even if this inmate gets a little wild, because most of the time that's what's probably going to happen if you have to open up that cell, that inmate's probably going to be a bit wild. We want to make sure that when we, bring it up to the highest level, we could say, well, wait a second, we removed anybody that was involved with being initially splashed. So at this point here, we have a new team, fresh eyes, and we handle this situation as professional as possible. But we did have an inmate that was initially combative. Hey, Russ, I think that's great what you said, Russ. That also helps out that officer, right? Because you're assuming that officer could be overwhelmed with emotion, correct?
Well, yeah, and plus, it may change according to, what your different department calls for. But in a case like in California like that, the fact that a gassing took place, that's an automatic incident package, right? So an incident package is always going to be looked at under the microscope about everything that went on. Plus, at the end of this thing, I'll just about guarantee that you're probably going to end up having a cell extraction over this. And the reason that I say that is because you do have to go in, you have to remove that inmate. You have to put him where he doesn't have access to water or a toilet or cups or things like that, because he presents a potential threat to the next person that comes along, and you can't just let him continue to take staff out at that point. You're going to have to move him to some sort of higher level of custody. And if you don't, this is just going to devolve into something that's going to blow up in your face, regardless of whether you removed that initial staff member or not, because this inmate is putting himself in a position where everything is about to go bad. So we need to get him into a position to get him to that dry cell, to remove everything possible from him that he can use for more of these attacks. And, usually you have some kind of barriers in front of a cell like that to stop the splashing, the gassing from occurring. And you're able to manage that threat in a way commensurate with the way he's with the way his behavior has been.
Yeah, and I will add this, guys. This is the moment where, before you go into that cell, if the inmate's not an immediate threat to others, and you do feel that you have to extract that inmate into a dry cell or whatnot, get the cameras. Let them see efforts to de-escalate. I mean, you already have an inmate that's non-compliant, obviously. So, you're going to want to show efforts to de-escalate the situation. And again, guys, the reason being is because if you're forced to go right in there, and this inmate does become combative, and then you wind up, having to use force, everybody's going to think that it was retaliatory by nature. So what you need to do is definitely have those cameras ready and to record the professionalism of this extraction, because there's also going to be inmates that do that. You're going to want inmates. I don't know if this inmate's going to listen in particular, but once they have a record of doing that, they're going to have what they call step to the rear of the cell orders. So before you even if it's on a regular dealing with that inmate has to step to the rear of their cell because they pose a threat when it comes to splashing staff. But again, I like what Russ said. If it has been deemed that the inmate is a threat, and I believe that, again, you always want to cross your T's and dot your I's. It really does depend on the policy of the agency, because if you're still looking to do a cell extraction, that definitely requires a higher level of approval. But again, that's only if you're dealing with an inmate that refuses to move. Don't forget, if the inmate poses a threat to someone else at that time or a threat to themselves, now it's more of a code. Now it's an emergent. So it's not really a cell extraction. It's more of, we have to go in. We have a code going on, whether it's, he's assaulting the inmate or he himself is hurting himself. So you are going to be able to justify that. But when it comes to having that inmate to be extracted, because now I'm looking to move that inmate from point A to point B, get them in a dry cell, whatever it is, you want to make sure, depending on your policy, that you have all those higher level of approvals before it happens. And you're going to have to be able to justify why that inmate needs to come out of their cell at that moment, because that is very important. Because again, on the higher level, they're going to be looking at retaliation. So again, if there has been an order to say, you know what, we need to get that inmate out, because at this point, I like what Russ said, we got to put him in the dry cell. We got to do these things. Not a problem. Let's get a camera. Let's get everything videoed. In case he gets moved up to a higher level, let's just make sure we have the evidence that we need to show that we were professional in the dealing with this inmate. Because again, this inmate is most likely going to be combative, which means that I'm sure the inmate's not going to come out of this bruise free. They're probably going to have some bruise, most because we're reacting to them being aggressive. But I definitely believe you got to have those cameras in play, and everything is going to have to be camera, move, supervisor, escort, at least from point A to point B, and then it could be decided later as to what needs to be done. But the reason why you're doing that is because people are going to be expecting that retaliation aspect. So what are you doing? Not here, because we videoed it. We had a supervisor. Every time the inmate was moved in a short period of time, we had approval for a camera escort. So it kind of helps out with that liability. What's your thoughts on that, Russ?
At that point, you're already, at that point where you're involved in this as an incident package. So all these notifications are going to take place anyway. You're probably going to have to get medical down there. There may or may not be some type of an extraction going on. And so at that point, you just really have to follow that documentation in order to protect yourself, because otherwise, or I shouldn't say otherwise, because no matter what, this situation is probably going to end up with the inmate trying to file some kind of grievance, try and file some sort of, civil action. It's not beyond the realm, and I've seen this before, where they will injure themselves before you get into the cell. So it's worth it if you can to get a camera there ahead of time and record some of that. Maybe you'll get lucky and get an admission out of him, something like that, with regards to what happened to this other officer. That's always a potential, because we're looking at this point for evidence, right? And this evidence is going to be the kind of, absence of evidence of any wrongdoing that we did, plus evidence of the wrongdoing that the inmate is going to be accused of in this. So it's all one huge ball of wax. just do it right.
Yeah, and I want you guys to make sure that what me and Russ is saying, that all because you got splashed or gassed doesn't mean you're going to quickly go in and cell extract that inmate. The inmate really has to pose some level of a threat. I like what Russ said. Maybe the inmate has a collection of cocktails, ready to go. Well, that's going to be a concern for any staff that needs to peek in there and do their job. And the other thing, guys, is this is why it's very important that the prosecutors and stuff like that, they take these concerns seriously, because we look to them to deter behavior. So when we feel that certain behaviors are out of our hands to control, we look for the legal system to back us. When the legal system doesn't back us, we wind up starting to question how we can deter behavior to make sure we're safe. We become less effective, believe it or not, when we don't have that backing, because we become less motivated. A lot of us that take the risk every day is because we feel at some point that people have our back in doing our job. And one of the big things, as discussed right now, is officers getting splashed or gassed happens a lot. Staff members getting splashed happens a lot. Are we doing enough to deter that behavior to motivate staff to continue to be effective? And I think for me, that is something that all states should be consistent with, because literally, again, it's a threat to our safety and well-being. It's a biological threat. And if somebody was to do this to someone on the streets, it would be a zero tolerance. It would be taken, and that person would be fully prosecuted. But in the prison system, it doesn't happen so much. Like Russ said, it's like we're expendable. Hey, Russ, you have any closing thoughts?
Yeah, this is one of those things where it's better to be out in front of it than behind it. And what I mean by that is you need to take sort of a preemptive, proactive approach to it. And you need to think about it in a comprehensive context in order to try and actually stop these things before they happen. Day in and day out, just making sure that you're doing your searches, you're not letting guys stack up cups. That's one thing you can do. The next thing that you can do is, make sure that everyone that you can is on top of being able to communicate effectively with these individuals. Sometimes we can talk them out of this kind of stuff. Sometimes you can't talk them out of anything. The next thing you want to do is you want to do things that really impinge upon them. And, if you can get together with your union or whoever, maybe some advocates for victims' rights, every time these guys pull this stuff, sue them civilly for every dollar you can get out of them. I think that in the long run, you start doing all these things, maybe you can soften them up where they're not willing to go 8 or 10 years without canteen because they're paying you out of their pocket. And then last but not least, when this does happen, support that individual that had it happen to him. That person is angry. That person wants to take it out. You know what? Commiserate with them a little bit, then help them cool off, take them out of the equation, and then do what you have to do to try and get a successful prosecution out of this. And always, always, always push your supervisors, push your management, push law enforcement in the county that this happened in to get those prosecutions, and don't let up.
Yeah, guys, I love what Russ is saying real quick. My closing thoughts are going to mirror that. So basically, an inmate splashing you is a move I call it's a checker move. They expect you to react. Now, we have to be strategic because ultimately we want to push it to the highest level so the person could be prosecuted. The last thing we want to do is become aggressive or retaliatory in that response. And that really doesn't do the officer who got gassed any favors. It doesn't. What we want to do is we want to make sure that we alleviate any level of liability. That's what I'm saying. If by chance you do have to extract that inmate, which again, you're going to have to be able to explain that and definitely try to get that approval, get those cameras on, do whatever you can to show that even though this inmate did this, we remained professional in our response. That's the key. That's how we win lawsuits. But this only helps, or this only can happen, is if Russ says, is if people are taking it at that higher level serious. right? Because if they're not taking it serious, then we're going to find other means to deter. And that's when we start getting in trouble. That's when we start losing our jobs. But also, I like to, you know what? I like to also push for the higher level, because you're creating that environment where we feel the need to do that. I'm not justifying it. I want people to realize that. I'm not justifying it. But I want you guys up top to also realize that when you don't back up our staff, you know, and when you don't do the right thing and they're supposed to trust in the system, you're creating rogue staff. Because these inmates that know they're not going to be punished and they know that it's just going to be reactionary, there's nothing strategic here, they'll continue splashing. But I love it, like Russ said, I do love that civil aspect too. You know, an inmate goes to splash you, you know, and then all of a sudden you come back with civil lawsuits. Oh, that's going to carry some weight too. Even if they don't have anything, trust and believe there's little things that they get in the prison that money could wind up going to you, however small it is. Because to be honest with you, it's not so much about winning the lawsuit. It's a matter of, one, holding those people responsible, holding them accountable, but also inconveniencing them. You know, it's not about the money in the end. It's about the fact that you lost. You know, I want the inmate to know that you made a bad decision. And in the end, the justice system did say that you're going to be held accountable for it. You know why? Because maybe at one point they're starting to respect the work we do. But if they don't respect the work we do, then they're never going to hold the inmates accountable. That's the sad thing, but it's the truth. You know, maybe if they start respecting what we do and the dangers we face, they'll start holding those inmates accountable. But as always, guys, the show is tiered. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify you every time I post a video. Stay safe.